I used to think the scariest part of delivering food at night was getting robbed. Dark roads, empty houses, no one around for miles. But that night I realized the real danger wasn't the customer. It was the moment I saw a light moving in the woods and understood that I wasn't the only one waiting in the dark. That night I was working DoorDash. It was my full-time job at the time, which meant I usually tried to stay out for 8 or 9 hours, even though I was terrible at keeping a normal schedule. I'd always tell myself I'd start earlier, and then somehow I'd end up pushing it later and later until I was starting close to midnight. That night was one of those nights. I was already about 3 hours into my shift, and it was around 1 a.m. when the order came through. A grocery pickup from a small gas station convenience store just outside of town. Nothing special. I drove over, pulled into the mostly empty lot, and went inside. The place was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerators and a single bored cashier behind the counter. When I got back to my car, I checked the order again. One item, a single, large, cheap bottle of wine. That immediately meant I couldn't just drop it off and leave. I hated alcohol deliveries for that reason. You had to wait. You had to check ID. You had to stand there and interact with the customer. At 1 in the morning, in the middle of nowhere. That wasn't exactly my favorite thing to do. Still, I started driving. The address was about 15 minutes away, deep into the wooded part of town. Most of the area around here was forest anyway, so nothing about that was unusual. But as soon as I turned onto the long gravel driveway, I could tell the place was different. The road was rough, uneven, like no one had cared enough to maintain it in years. My headlights bounced over rocks and ruts as I slowly pulled forward. Then I saw the house. It stood completely alone, a single old home sitting at the edge of the trees. No nearby neighbors, no lights on inside. The only thing illuminating it was my own headlights washing over the front of the building. I parked and stepped out of the car. The woods were silent. Not the normal night silence with bugs and distant animal sounds. This was a heavier kind of quiet, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Every sound I made felt too loud, my boots crunching on gravel, my jacket shifting as I moved. I stood beside my car and pulled up the order on my phone, getting the app ready for the ID check. That's when I noticed a small light out in the woods. At first, I didn't think much of it. It looked like it could have been a porch light from another house deeper in the trees. I couldn't see the structure itself, just the faint glow breaking through the branches. It was far enough away that I didn't question it. Rural areas are full of scattered homes. Once the app was ready, I walked up to the porch. There was no doorbell, so I knocked. The sound echoed inside the house in a way that made it feel hollow, like the interior was empty. It was a strange echo, but I brushed it off. Old houses sound weird. I waited. The only thing that felt off at that point was how dark everything was. No porch light, no interior lights. Just my headlights throwing long shadows across the front of the house. After about a minute, I finally heard movement inside. The door creaked open. Immediately, I noticed how pitch black it was inside the house. Not dim, not low light, completely dark. I could barely make out the shape of the man standing in the doorway. He was tall, thin, his face swallowed by shadow. I told him I just needed to check his ID for the alcohol. He nodded. I think he smiled, but it was hard to tell in the darkness. His voice was slow when he spoke, gravelly and low, like he hadn't used it in a while. He told me to give him a second to grab his wallet. Then he turned and walked away. He didn't close the door. I watched him disappear into the darkness of the hallway, his silhouette swallowed up just a few steps inside the house. The door remained open, framing nothing but a black void. That's when the uneasiness really set in. I glanced back toward my car. The headlights were still on, cutting through the dark driveway, the woods rising up behind it like a wall. And then my eyes drifted back toward the forest to the side of the house. The light I'd noticed earlier was still there, except now it was closer. I stared at it for a few seconds before realizing it wasn't fixed in place. It was moving, not sweeping around like a normal flashlight beam, but gently swaying, shaking slightly, like someone was standing there holding a light, watching me. The distance felt wrong, too close, maybe 50 feet into the trees. A chill ran down my spine. The woods were still silent. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. But as I stared at the light, I suddenly heard something from inside the house. Soft creaks, floorboards shifting, slow, careful movement, like someone was approaching the doorway from within the darkness. That was it. I didn't wait to see who was coming. I jumped off the porch and sprinted for my car. As I ran, the light in the woods shifted again, but I refused to look long enough to see what it was doing. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and peeled out of the driveway, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't stop until I made it back to the gas station. I sat there in the empty parking lot, breathing hard, trying to convince myself that I just overreacted. That maybe the guy inside was normal. That maybe the light in the woods really was just another house. But the longer I sat there, the more wrong it all felt. A few days later, I finally looked up the address. The house had been abandoned for over 50 years. There were no nearby homes, no residents, no legal occupants. I don't know what was waiting for me in that house. And I don't know who was standing in the woods with that light. But I know one thing. I wasn't supposed to make it back to my car that night. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. Not right away. At first, I convinced myself it was just exhaustion. 1 in the morning, dark woods, an unfamiliar delivery location. My brain filling in the gaps with fear. That's what I told myself every time the image of that open doorway came back to me. Every time I remembered how the man had disappeared into the black hallway without turning on a single light. Every time I thought about the moving glow in the trees. But the feeling never went away. For days after that delivery, I couldn't get it out of my head. I'd be lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second. The silence of the woods. The way the house felt hollow. The soft creaks from inside. The light in the forest shifting like it was being held by someone who knew exactly where I was standing. I started jumping at stupid things, headlights passing my window, shadows moving across the walls when cars drove by. Any random light in the distance made my stomach tighten. Eventually, I did what I told myself I was never going to do. I went back during the day. I waited until it was bright out, late morning, when the sun was high enough that the woods didn't feel like they could swallow me whole. I told myself I just needed closure. Proof that I hadn't almost walked into something horrible. Proof that I was still in control of my own fear. The drive felt longer than I remembered. In daylight, the gravel road looked even worse. Deep ruts. Overgrown weeds along the edges. Branches from nearby trees scratching the sides of my car. It looked less like a driveway and more like a path that no one had used in years. When the house came into view, my stomach dropped. It looked nothing like a place someone was living in. The windows were dark, but not in the normal lights-off way. They were clouded over with dust and grime. Some of them were cracked. The paint on the siding was peeling in long strips, exposing old gray wood underneath. The porch sagged slightly on one side, like the foundation beneath it had given up trying to hold everything level. This wasn't just an old house. This was a dead house. I parked at the edge of the driveway, engine still running. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at it. In the daylight, the woods behind the house looked thinner, less threatening. You could see gaps between the trees, sunlight filtering through branches, birds moving around. No light in the forest now, no movement, no sign that anyone had ever been there. I forced myself out of the car. The closer I got to the house, the worse it felt. The porch boards creaked under my weight, loud and brittle. I stood where I'd stood the night before, right in front of the door, and suddenly the memory of that pitch-black interior hit me all over again. In daylight, I could see inside. The front room was empty. No furniture, no decorations, just dust and debris scattered across the floor. The hallway beyond was stripped bare, the walls stained with water damage, the ceiling sagging in places. There were no signs of anyone living there, no signs of recent activity at all. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. Instead, I walked around the side of the house, toward the tree line, toward where I'd seen the light. Up close, the woods were denser than they looked from the driveway. Fallen branches, thick underbrush. The ground was uneven, packed with leaves and old pine needles. But what caught my eye wasn't the forest itself. It was the footprints. They were faint, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. But once I noticed them, I couldn't unsee them. Pressed into the dirt and leaves, leading from deeper in the woods toward the side of the house. Not animal tracks, human footprints. Old, but not ancient. The kind that don't disappear right away if no one disturbs the ground. They stopped about where I'd been standing the night before, right where the light had been. My heart started racing all over again. Someone had been there. Not years ago, not decades ago, recently. I backed away from the tree line and returned to my car without turning my back on the woods. I didn't feel safe until I was back on the main road, the house disappearing in my rearview mirror. That was the last delivery I ever took at night. I stopped doing late shifts after that. I started avoiding wooded areas when possible. I double-checked addresses more carefully. I even turned down certain orders if they looked too remote. Every time my phone pinged with a delivery deep into the trees, I felt that same tightness in my chest. The worst part is not knowing what would have happened if I'd waited at that door a few seconds longer. If I hadn't looked toward the woods. If I hadn't noticed the light moving. If I'd stood there, staring into that black hallway, waiting for a man who shouldn't have existed in a house that wasn't supposed to be occupied. I don't know if the person in the woods and the man inside the house were working together. I don't know if the light was meant to distract me, or if it was meant to make sure I didn't leave. All I know is that whatever was happening out there, I wasn't supposed to be part of it. And the thought that I was one decision away from something far worse still keeps me up at night. Next story. I used to think the woods were empty at night, that whatever moved out there was just animals, shadows, the wind playing tricks on your head. But that night at my brother's cabin, something was watching me from the trees. And it didn't just watch, it waited. If my brother's dog hadn't chased it away, I don't think I'd be alive to tell this story. In 2019, I drove out to my older brother's place to watch his dog while he was away on a short work trip. It was supposed to be simple. 3 days. Feed the dog, let him out, keep the place in one piece. My brother always called it his cabin, but it wasn't some tiny shack in the wilderness. It was a normal house, decent size, just buried deep in the woods. No neighbors, no streetlights, just trees in every direction. The first day was calm. I hung out with my brother, helped him get ready for his trip, and by mid-afternoon, he was gone. The place felt different the moment his truck disappeared down the long gravel driveway. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears. That evening, after dinner, I decided to build a small campfire in the yard to watch the sunset. I brought Cooper out with me. He was a young German Shepherd mix. Smart, alert, and usually calm. For the first hour, it actually felt peaceful. The fire crackled. The sky burned orange behind the trees. Then the sun disappeared. The woods changed the moment darkness settled in. The trees stopped feeling distant. The quiet became heavy, like something was holding its breath. Not even 10 minutes after the sun went down, I put the fire out and went back inside. Sitting out there suddenly felt like sitting on display. Inside, I sat on the couch with Cooper and, ironically, put on a horror movie. The long drive had drained me, and I kept drifting in and out of sleep. At some point, I jolted awake. Cooper wasn't beside me. I sat up and spotted him sitting by the front door. Not relaxed, not curious. He was sitting upright, head forward, staring at the door like he was locked onto something on the other side. "Cooper?" I whispered. "You okay, buddy?" He glanced back at me for half a second. Then his eyes snapped back to the door. That's when my stomach tightened. I walked over and looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just darkness. I cracked the door open slightly and leaned out. The yard was still. No movement, no sound of animals, no wind. Just the black outline of trees swallowing the yard. I closed the door and told myself it was probably a deer. Or a raccoon. Cooper was smart, but dogs freak out over harmless stuff all the time, right? I finished the movie and went to bed. The next morning was calm. I let Cooper outside, made coffee, sat on the porch, and tried to enjoy the quiet. I thought about going for a walk, but didn't want to risk getting turned around in the forest. The place looked endless once you stepped off the path. That night, it happened again. I was back on the couch with another movie on when Cooper suddenly exploded into deep, aggressive barking from the kitchen behind me. I jumped up, heart slamming against my ribs, and rushed in. Cooper was standing rigid, hair raised along his back, tail tucked between his legs. He wasn't barking at anything I could see, just empty air. I tried calming him down, talking softly, but even when the barking stopped, the low growl in his throat didn't. The kitchen was empty. The window above the counter was too high for him to see out of. Nothing made sense. I led him back to the couch, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Then the tapping started. A hollow, dull tapping sound came from the kitchen. Slow, deliberate. Cooper lost it again. This time, I didn't tell him to stop. I walked back to the kitchen and went straight to the window, half expecting to see a raccoon clinging to the glass. There was nothing, just my own reflection in the dark pane and the black wall of trees beyond. That's when the unease really set in. Cooper wasn't reacting to random forest noises. He was reacting to something that knew where we were. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that Cooper was just reacting to sounds I wasn't used to hearing in the woods. But even as I told myself that, I noticed he never took his eyes off the windows. For the rest of the night, he stayed glued to my side, ears perked, body tense. Every time the wind brushed the trees outside, his head snapped toward the sound. He didn't relax once. Around 11, I shut off the lights in the cabin and headed to the bedroom. Cooper followed close behind me, practically glued to my leg. I filled his water bowl, shut the bedroom door, and stepped into the bathroom to take a quick shower. The water had barely warmed up when I heard it. A dull thump against the wall, then another, and then Cooper started barking again, this time louder and more panicked than before. I shut the water off instantly and threw on whatever clothes I could grab, my heart already racing. When I rushed back into the bedroom, Cooper wasn't there. The bedroom door was open. That made no sense. Cooper was smart, but opening doors was way beyond anything he'd ever done before. I heard his barking echoing deeper inside the cabin. I ran into the hallway and froze. The front door was wide open. Cold air poured in from the darkness outside, and just beyond the doorway, I saw Cooper running away from the house, straight toward the tree line, barking wildly at something I couldn't see. "Cooper!" I shouted. Within seconds, he disappeared into the woods. The barking faded into the distance. I stood there, paralyzed, staring into the black forest. Every instinct screamed at me not to follow him, but the thought of him out there alone, chasing whatever had been lurking around the cabin, overpowered everything else. I grabbed a flashlight from the front closet and ran after him. The moment I stepped into the trees, the world changed. The cabin lights vanished behind me. The forest swallowed me whole. My flashlight beam cut through branches and fog, revealing nothing but endless trunks and shadows. And then, silence. Cooper's barking stopped, completely. The woods went dead quiet. No insects, no wind. Just the sound of my own breathing. "Cooper?" I called out. Nothing. I called his name again, louder. My voice felt small out there, like it couldn't travel more than a few feet before being swallowed by the dark. I stood frozen for what felt like forever, convinced that whatever had drawn him out here was now standing somewhere just beyond my flashlight's reach. Then I heard leaves rustle. My chest tightened. I aimed the light forward, expecting to see glowing eyes staring back at me from the trees. Instead, Cooper burst out of the darkness and sprinted straight toward me. His tail was tucked so far under his body it almost touched his stomach. His ears were pinned back. He whimpered as he reached me, pressing against my legs, eyes locked on the black space behind him like something was still there. I didn't wait. I scooped him up enough to get him turned around and ran back toward the cabin as fast as I could. I didn't look behind me once. I didn't want to see if something was following us. We slammed the front door shut and I locked it. Then I locked every other door I could find. I called 911 with shaking hands and then called my brother, trying to explain what had just happened without sounding like I was losing my mind. The police came out, but by the time they searched the area around the cabin, there was nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no explanation for how the door had been opened. We didn't stay there that night. We went to a hotel until my brother came back the next day. Later, the police suggested someone may have been stalking the cabin for days, maybe longer. Someone had likely gotten inside while I was in the shower, and Cooper had chased them out before they could reach me. What happened out there in the forest while Cooper was alone? I don't know. But whatever he saw out there terrified him for weeks. Even now, years later, every time I visit my brother, Cooper still stares at the tree line when the sun goes down, like he's waiting to see if something steps out of the woods again. Next story. I didn't realize it at the time, but the thing I hit in the road that night wasn't an accident. It wasn't road debris. It wasn't bad luck. Someone put it there, because 2 people went missing on that same stretch of road that night. And if I hadn't trusted my gut, I would have been the third. It was close to midnight when I finally left work. Normally, I took the train into the city. The drive was long, about an hour and a half, and the train was easier. But that night, I'd stayed too late. The trains had already stopped running. I was exhausted. Not the kind of tired where you're about to fall asleep at the wheel, but the heavy, dragging exhaustion that makes every mile feel longer than the last. The kind where you feel every second passing. Once I was out of the city, the roads opened up into long, empty rural stretches. No streetlights, no buildings, just dark pavement cutting through trees and fields. It was the kind of road that makes you feel small. 40 minutes went by without much happening. I saw maybe 4 or 5 cars pass in the opposite direction. That was it. No houses, no lights, just darkness on either side of the road. That's when I noticed the first truck. It was pulled off on the grassy shoulder, just beyond the pavement. No hazard lights, no headlights, no one standing nearby. It felt strange, seeing a vehicle abandoned like that in the middle of nowhere, but I figured it was probably someone who ran out of gas or had car trouble and called for a ride. 2 minutes later, I passed another one. This time, it was a car parked near the tree line. Same situation, no lights, no one around. I'd driven this route dozens of times before. I'd never seen anything like this. The coincidence stuck with me. It made me more alert. I found myself scanning the roadside as I drove, looking for anything else out of place. A couple minutes passed. Then something appeared in my headlights. It was right in the road. I didn't have time to react, no time to swerve, no time to brake. My right tire hit it. The impact wasn't huge, but it was sharp and sudden. I felt it in the steering wheel. For a second, I just froze, my brain trying to process what had happened. I slowed down, listening for anything wrong with the car. The engine sounded fine, but less than a minute later, I could feel it. The steering felt off. The ride felt uneven. I didn't need the warning light to tell me what I already knew. The tire was going flat. I pulled off to the side of the road. That's when the realization hit me. I was now the third car, pulled over in the middle of nowhere. The same stretch of road, the same situation. The only difference was that I was still inside mine. I put the car in park and just sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring out into the darkness. I was too tired to even be angry, just frustrated, defeated. When I stepped out to check the tire, the night felt bigger somehow. Trees surrounded me in every direction. The road stretched empty into darkness ahead and behind me. No lights, no sounds except the faint hum of my engine and the wind moving through the branches. The tire was shredded. There were fresh scrapes around the rim, and the rubber was already sagging. I knew I'd need a tow. I stood there for a moment longer, scanning the road and the tree line. That's when I saw him. Far down the road, someone was walking toward me. At first, he was just a silhouette, a dark shape moving slowly along the edge of the trees, not fully on the road, like he was deliberately trying to stay out of the headlights. My first thought was that he might have come from one of the abandoned vehicles I'd passed earlier. But something about the way he walked made my stomach tighten. He wasn't walking toward the road. He was walking toward me. He kept walking toward me. At first, I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. It was late. I was exhausted. Being stranded alone on an empty rural road at midnight will mess with your head. Anyone would feel uneasy in that situation. But the longer I watched him, the worse the feeling became. He wasn't walking in the middle of the road. He stayed close to the tree line, moving through the tall grass like he didn't want to be seen until he was already close. That's when I got back into my car. I shut the door and locked it. then pulled my phone out and started calling a tow truck. The signal out there was weak, and the call kept cutting in and out. I kept glancing up between sentences, watching him get closer. With every few steps he took, the tension in my chest tightened. By the time the operator finally answered clearly, the man was close enough that I could make out more details. He was thin. His posture was wrong, too stiff, too twitchy. He kept stopping for half a second, then moving again, like he couldn't decide whether to approach me or not. The operator was asking me questions, my location, my car model, but my attention was split. I watched the man step fully out of the trees and onto the shoulder of the road. He came right up to my window. He didn't knock, didn't wave, didn't ask if I needed help. He just stood there, breathing heavily, staring at me through the glass. There was something deeply wrong with his eyes. They were wide, unfocused, like he was either on something or like he hadn't slept in days. His body jittered slightly, like he was trying to contain nervous energy that had nowhere to go. I couldn't read his expression at all. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then his eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. I didn't finish the call. I didn't say goodbye to the operator. I put the car in drive. The tires screamed as the rims scraped against the pavement, but I didn't care. I hit the gas and pulled back onto the road, adrenaline drowning out the pain of what it might cost me later. In my rearview mirror, I saw him turn his head slowly to follow me as I passed. I drove for maybe 20 seconds before I saw another car on the shoulder. This one was different. Its driver's side door was hanging open. The interior light was still on. The car looked abandoned in a hurry. My stomach dropped. That's when it clicked. That man hadn't just been walking. He'd been coming from that car. I kept driving. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I pulled into a lit parking lot and finally let my hands shake. My tire was completely destroyed by then, but I was safe. That was all that mattered. At the time, I told myself it was just a strange encounter, a creepy guy, bad luck, wrong place at the wrong time. I tried to forget about it. 4 days later, I saw the news. 2 people had gone missing along the same rural road I drove that night. Their cars were found abandoned on the shoulder. Both had damaged tires. Both had struck something placed in the road, deliberately. My blood went cold when I realized the timeline matched exactly. The 2 cars I'd passed before hitting the object, those were theirs. I called the police and told them everything I could remember. The abandoned vehicles, the man walking out of the woods, the open car door. They took my statement. But as of today, those 2 people were never found. No suspects, no bodies, no answers. And sometimes, when I drive alone at night, I think about how easily I could have made one different choice. If I'd stayed in my car, if I'd tried to be polite, if I'd rolled the window down, I don't think I would have driven away.